I remember the exact scent that lingered in the doorway when she left. It was that same perfume she'd worn since our first year of marriage. Floral, a little sweet, with a hint of vanilla that used to make me weak when she leaned close. That night, though, it smelled different. Too strong. Almost as if she drenched herself in it to cover something else. She smiled at me the way she always did before her so-called girls' trips. Bright, casual, unbothered. A duffel bag slung over her shoulder, hiking boots laced tight. Her hair pulled into that practical ponytail she used for camping. "Don't wait up," she said. "Signal will be bad out there." Her words were rehearsed. I didn't notice it until later, but her voice carried a lightness that wasn't meant for me. At the time, I just nodded, kissed her cheek, and watched her walk down the driveway to her car. The taillights disappeared into the night, and with them, I thought, my sense of peace. Hours passed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I poured myself a drink. Tried watching some old reruns on the TV. Tried scrolling through my phone. But something gnawed at me. It was in the silence, the absence of her presence, that the unease grew. That's when I heard it. A faint buzz on the counter. Her tablet. She never left it behind. She guarded it like a second skin. At first, I told myself not to look. Respect her privacy, I thought. Don't be that husband. But the buzzing continued 1, 2, 3 times. A cascade of messages. Curiosity gave way to dread. My hand moved before my mind could argue. I tapped the screen. The preview of the first message hit me like a sledgehammer. Can't wait for our weekend under the stars again. Same spot, same fire. I froze. The words blurred. My throat tightened until I could barely swallow. I opened the thread. Dozens of messages poured out like poison, each one confirming what my gut had whispered and my heart refused to hear. Plans to meet at a lake. Secret rendezvous described with a casual intimacy that no stranger could fake. Pictures. Her smiling next to a tent, beer in her hand, hair wild, eyes glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. But it wasn't me taking those photos. It was him. I scrolled further, my pulse hammering in my ears. Words of affection, playful inside jokes, confessions of passion that had once belonged to me. She had recycled them, repurposed them, given them away like they were nothing. And suddenly I couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, the air too thin. My heart didn't just break. It imploded. All at once. The marriage I thought was steady, faithful, unshakable cracked open to reveal something rotten at its core. I staggered to the kitchen sink, gripping the counter with both hands. The stainless steel was cold beneath my palms, grounding me against the heat rising through my chest. My reflection in the darkened window above the sink looked hollow. A stranger. How long? I whispered. The words weren't a question. They were a sentence. How long had this theater of lies been running? How many weekends had I sat home alone, believing she was hiking with friends while she was wrapped in someone else's arms under pines? I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the tablet against the wall until it shattered. Instead, I stood there, paralyzed, listening to faint hum the refrigerator, as if it were mocking me with its steady, unbroken rhythm. I looked down at my hand. The wedding ring. A simple silver band. It had been light once, almost weightless, a symbol of love freely given. Now it felt heavy, suffocating, like iron shackles around my finger. I slipped it off and turned it in my hand. The metal caught the dim light of the kitchen, and for a moment, I thought about dropping it into the drain, letting the garbage disposal chew it into dust. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I slid it back on and grabbed my car keys. My body moved before my mind had a plan. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't sit in that house another second. Not with those words burned into my memory. The engine roared to life. Headlights cut through the darkness as I pulled out of the driveway. The night swallowed me whole, mile after mile of empty road stretching ahead. My thoughts spiraled. Anger, sorrow, confusion, disbelief, looping like broken film. I drove past gas stations, past shuttered diners, past fields where the moonlight spilled like pale silver paint. My chest ached as if the betrayal itself were lodged there, pressing against my ribs. Every memory replayed differently now. The laughter, the tender nights, the quiet mornings with coffee and sunlight streaming through the blinds. Had it all been a performance? Had she been half somewhere else even when she was sitting right across from me? I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, my eyes burning. I couldn't find tears, not yet. Just a hollowness, a numb disbelief that clung like frost. At some point, I pulled over on a lonely stretch of road, turned off the engine, sat in silence. The darkness pressed into the windshield, vast and endless. My own reflection stared back at me, ghost-like in the glass, with eyes I barely recognized. The wedding ring gleamed faintly in the glow of the dashboard. I twisted around my finger, back and forth, like a prisoner toying with his chains. I whispered into the silence, "The truth won't stay buried." The words felt foreign, almost like a vow. Not to her, to myself. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, how I would confront her, or whether I even had the strength. But I knew one thing. The man I had been, the blind, trusting husband, was gone, and in his place was someone raw, someone fractured, someone searching for a way out of the nightmare. With that thought, I started the engine again and drove on into the night. Not home, not yet, just forward, into the unknown. Headlights cutting the path through the dark, betrayal riding shotgun like an uninvited ghost. If betrayal is a blade, it doesn't strike only once. It cuts backward too, slicing through memory, rewriting the story you thought you lived. After that night with the tablet, I couldn't stop revisiting the past. Every moment replayed itself in my mind, colored now by suspicion. I thought the first time I saw her. A college friend had dragged me to a bonfire by the river. She was there, laughing, barefoot in the grass, her hair wild in the firelight. I remember thinking she didn't look like anyone else. She carried herself as if the world bent toward her, as if gravity favored her. When she spoke to me, it felt like sunlight after a long winter. She asked questions no one else asked. One of my favorite childhood memory was why I wore an old watch that barely ticked. I told her it belonged to my father. She touched my wrist, said, "Then that's the most important thing you own." I fell fast, too fast. Looking back, it was less like falling in love and more like being pulled into an orbit I didn't want to escape. She was motion, I was stability. I thought we'd balance each other. In those early years, life was golden. Weekend road trips, nights spent under blankets talking about nothing and everything. She wore that same perfume then, the floral vanilla mix that seemed to belong to her alone. I remember the way it clung to my pillow after she stayed over, the way I would bury my face in it, as if it could promise forever. We married young. The wedding wasn't extravagant, but in my memory, it always glowed brighter than any cathedral could. I can still picture a photograph of us on that day, framed in silver, her leaning into me, eyes shining, my arm around her waist. For years, I believed that image was the truest reflection of us. But even then, there were cracks I didn't want to see. Friends would tease me gently, warn me more seriously. She likes attention. Be careful. I dismissed them. They didn't know her like I did. I thought they were jealous of her charm, her beauty, the way she lit up every room she entered. She had a restless energy. Vacations weren't long enough. Quiet nights weren't thrilling enough. She always wanted more, another trip, another adventure, another story to tell. And I wanted stability. I wanted roots. So I compromised, again and again. I gave up a job offer in another state because she didn't want to move. I cut back on seeing certain friends because she didn't like how they looked at her. I should have seen that as control. But I told myself it was love. That love meant sacrifice. Her girls' trips began around our 4th year of marriage. At first, I thought it was healthy, that she needed time with friends, space to breathe. When she came back from those weekends, she was radiant, her cheeks flushed, her eyes brighter. I thought it was happiness. Now I know it was something else entirely. The first time I questioned her about it, she laughed and kissed me. "You're too serious," she said. "Don't be that guy. Trust me." And I did. God, I did. Later, when her trips grew more frequent, my unease grew too. One night, when I asked if everything was all right, Tears welled up in her eyes. She told me she felt smothered, that she needed independence, that my doubt was proof I didn't really love her. I mistook manipulation for vulnerability. I apologized to her. I promised to do better. That night, she climbed into bed beside me, her hair damp from a shower, smelling faintly of smoke. She whispered, "Forever, right?" And I believed her. I look back now and wonder how many lies I accepted because I wanted to dream more than the truth. I wrapped myself in the illusion of forever, like an old coat that was threadbare but comforting. The symbols of our life together surrounded me then. The silver wedding ring that never left my hand. The photograph on the nightstand that I thought proved we were unbreakable. The perfume that drifted through the house whenever she came home from a trip. Each object was a talisman I clung to, blind to how they had already changed meaning. There's one memory that haunts me most. Our 10th anniversary. We stayed home that year. I cooked dinner, steak, roasted vegetables, a bottle of wine we'd been saving. She wore a red dress that stole my breath away. We danced in the living room, the silver photograph watching from the mantel. But I remember, as we swayed to some old song, she looked past me, out the window, as if something beyond our home called to her. I pulled her closer. She smiled at me, but her eyes were already elsewhere. Now, with hindsight, I see the pattern, the hunger for more, the way she collected admiration like souvenirs. I was not enough for her, not because I lacked, but because her thirst was endless. And me, I built my life around her happiness. I shaped myself into her anchor, her shield, her audience. I lost pieces of myself in the process. My friends drifted away. My career stalled. My sense of identity became tied to keeping her smiling, keeping her content. I told myself that's what marriage meant. Sacrifice, patience, endurance. I never stopped to ask if I was sacrificing myself into non-existence. The night after I discovered her messages, I pulled that old wedding photo out of the drawer, the one of us smiling on our wedding day. I looked at it for a long time, studying her eyes, my smile. I wondered if she'd already been lying to me then, if I had been too blinded by love to see. The photo no longer glowed. It looked staged, artificial, two actors frozen in a role they couldn't sustain. I placed it back into the drawer, shutting it with finality. The illusion of forever was gone. All that remained was the hollow truth, and the bitter question of what to do with it. I had always thought the worst pain in life was not knowing. That uncertainty gnawed more than truth. But I was wrong. The worst pain is seeing, having your eyes forced open to the thing you prayed would stay in the shadows. It was a Friday evening when she told me again, "The girls and I are going camping. Don't wait up." Her tone was light, too light. She threw her duffel bag over her shoulder with practiced ease. The same perfume clung to her skin. The floral vanilla mixture that once meant closeness now smelled like deceit. I kissed her cheek as she left. My lips brushed her skin, but my heart recoiled. This time, I didn't stay home. I waited until her car disappeared down the street. Then I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and the old watch my father had left me. It ticked faintly, almost in protest, as I slipped it onto my wrist. Time felt like a companion and a witness. I followed at a distance, headlights dimmed. My palms were slick against the steering wheel, my breath shallow. Every red light felt like a dare. Turn back. Let ignorance shelter you. But I pressed on. She drove for nearly 2 hours, out past the city, past familiar highways, into the wilderness. The road narrowed into gravel, then dirt. Finally, she pulled into a campground near a lake, tucked between towering pines. My heart was pounding so violently I thought it might rattle the steering column. I parked far enough to remain unseen and watched. She stepped out of the car, smoothing her jacket, fixing her hair. Then he appeared, a man I had never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, with a confidence that radiated even from a distance. He walked toward her with ease, as if this ritual had been performed many times before. And then it happened. She ran into his arms. No hesitation, no restraint. Their lips met, Their bodies pressed close, the kind of kiss that belonged to newlyweds or lovers intoxicated with passion. It was a kind of kiss I hadn't received from her in years. The sound of my own breath filled the car. It came ragged, uneven. My chest tightened, a vice around my ribs. My wedding ring felt like molten metal searing into my finger. I wanted to storm out, to rip her away from him, to demand explanations, but my body refused to move. I sat frozen, nailed to the seat, watching the life I thought I'd unravel in front of me. They unpacked their things together, laughing, shoulders brushing. She looked younger, lighter, as if she had shed the weight of me. They set up a tent, hands moving in unison, practiced. The image was unbearable. The woman I had vowed to protect building a home, even a temporary one, with someone else. I stayed hidden in the shadow for hours. They lit a fire, its glow flickering through the trees, reflecting off the lake. Their laughter carried through the night air. I could almost smell the smoke from here, the same smoke that used to cling to her hair when she returned from her girls' trips. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was erasure. Watching them, I realized I had already been replaced. She hadn't been mine for a long time. I was a placeholder, a safety net. Her true self, this self, the one laughing freely in another man's arms, had been living in secret. I gripped the old watch, feeling its faint tick against my wrist. Time hadn't stopped, but my world had. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped the car into gear and drove away, my eyes burning, my hands trembling. The road blurred in front of me. My mind replayed every image, the kiss, the fire, the intimacy I had been denied. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I was hollow. Her car wasn't there, of course. She wouldn't return until Sunday. The house was dark, silent. I stepped inside, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like gravity doubled. I went to the bathroom, turned on the light, and stared at my reflection. My face looked gaunt, my eyes red-rimmed, haunted. I touched the mirror as if to confirm I still existed. Who was this man? Certainly not the one in the wedding photograph, smiling with hope. I slipped off my wedding ring and placed it on the edge of the sink. The metal clicked against porcelain. I turned on the faucet and let the water run over it. The stream distorted the silver band, warping it into something unfamiliar. I watched the water swirl, drowning and cleansing at once. But I didn't throw it away. Not yet. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the creaks of the old house. Every sound felt like mockery. The silence itself was loud, reminding me of the emptiness beside me. I tried to eat the next morning, but the food turned to ash in my mouth. At work, I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen, unable to string together an email. I must have looked like a ghost. Colleagues asked if I was okay. I brushed them off with a half smile. Days blurred. Nights stretched endless. I began avoiding mirrors. I didn't recognize the man staring back. But somewhere inside the collapse, a seed of something else began to grow. It came quietly, almost unnoticed, a whisper in the dark when I felt weakest. She doesn't get to write the ending of your story. I repeated it to myself like a mantra. At first, it was shaky, fragile, but each time it grew firmer. One evening, as I sat in the living room, I picked up that old wedding photo again. Her smile looked different now, almost mocking. Mine looked naive. I wanted to tear it in half, but instead, I set it down gently, because I realized something. This wasn't just the story of her betrayal. It was also the story of my survival, my rebirth. I looked at the ring still resting by the sink, gleaming faintly under the bathroom light. It no longer felt like a shackle. It felt like evidence. Proof of a man who had given everything and received nothing in return. Proof of a love that had been desecrated, yes, but also proof of my capacity to love deeply. I whispered again, louder this time. She doesn't get to write the ending. And with that, a spark lit inside me. Small but steady. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know how I would rebuild, how I would confront her, or how I would reclaim my dignity. But I knew one thing for certain. I would not let this be the final chapter. The fire in their tent might have burned bright that night, But inside me, another fire had been lit, one that would not be extinguished. The morning after my discovery, the house felt like a mausoleum. Every object seemed embalmed with memory. Her coffee mug still sitting by the sink, the faint trace of her perfume lingering in the hallway, the dent in her pillow where her head should have been. I moved through the rooms like a stranger trespassing in his own life. My feet dragged against hardwood floors that once echoed with laughter and footsteps in harmony. The silence was unbearable, thicker than grief, heavier than rage. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wedding photo propped up on the counter. Her smile radiated youth and promise. Mine radiated trust. Now it mocked me. The glass frame seemed almost cruel, holding together a moment that had long since shattered. My wedding ring still lay by the bathroom sink, untouched. I glanced at it before leaving for work, but I didn't put it back on. My finger felt naked, lighter, but also strangely free. That absence was a wound and a whisper of liberation. At work, my colleagues noticed a change. I moved like a shadow, present but not alive. I answered questions with clipped responses, avoided eye contact, skipped lunch. One co-worker, an older man named Harris, pulled me aside quietly. "You look like hell," he said, his tone more compassionate than judgmental. I almost confessed everything, but the words choked in my throat. Admitting it out loud would have made it too real. Nights were worse. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by images of her in that tent, the firelight on her face, her laughter echoing against the pines. I clenched the sheets so tightly my knuckles whitened, but no grip could hold together a life unraveling. I tried drowning it in whiskey once. The burn felt honest, at least, but the glass in my hand reflected back a hollow man, and I realized I couldn't numb my way out of this. The pain wasn't just in me, it was me. It was a Thursday evening when something inside me broke open. She texted, "Running late. Don't wait for me." No explanation, no excuse, just casual dismissal. I stared at the message until my vision blurred. That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep rotting in the ashes of this house. So I packed. Not everything, just the essentials. A few changes of clothes, a toiletry bag, my father's watch, and a box of old photographs I wasn't ready to part with. I slipped the wedding photo into the box almost mechanically, unsure whether I kept it as evidence, as memory, or as fuel for something I didn't yet understand. Before leaving, I walked through the house one last time. I touched the dining table, where we'd once shared long meals, now reduced to silence. I traced the outline of the sofa, where she used to fall asleep in my arms, now cold and empty. And finally, I stood at the bathroom sink, staring at the ring still resting there. I picked it up. For a moment, I considered sliding it back onto my finger, pretending, retreating into the lie. Instead, I slipped it into my pocket. Not on me, but not gone. Like a wound that hadn't healed but still demanded to be carried. I drove with no destination. The highway stretched endlessly before me, headlights carving tunnels through the night. My father's watch ticked steadily on my wrist, each second reminding me I was still moving, still alive. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. Eventually, I found myself in a small coastal town, the kind of place where time moved slower and faces were unfamiliar. I checked into a modest motel overlooking the water. The room smelled faintly of salt and old wood. The bed creaked. The curtains were thin. But it was mine, untainted by her laughter, her lies. The first night there, I stood on the balcony, staring at the ocean. The waves crashed endlessly, indifferent to my pain. They pulled away and returned, again and again, as if reminding me that leaving was only the beginning. Healing, like the tide, would come in cycles. Days blurred differently now. I walked along the beach in the mornings, the cold sand grounding me. I watched gulls fight over scraps, their cries sharp and wild. Sometimes I wrote in a notebook, half thoughts, fragments of memory, pieces of anger I couldn't yet shape into meaning. I kept the watch on my wrist and the ring in my pocket. They became anchors. The watch, a reminder of time's relentless march. The ring, a reminder what had been lost, and what should never be forgotten. Occasionally, I caught myself thinking of her, wondering if she noticed my absence. If she texted, I ignored it. If she called, I let it ring out. The silence became its own form of power. One afternoon, I found a small bookstore tucked into a side street. I wandered inside, breathing in the musk of paper and ink. The owner, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, asked if I was looking for anything in particular. I shook my head. She handed me a book of poetry, saying softly, "This one finds people when they need it." That night, I read by the dim motel lamp. The words spoke of betrayal, of brokenness, of rebuilding. One line struck me. Ashes are proof that something burned, but they're also proof that something survived the fire. I closed the book and wept. Not the quiet tears I'd shed in secret before, but raw, unguarded sobs that shook through my chest. It was grief, yes, but also release. The next morning, I rose early and walked the shoreline again. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the waves in gold. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Small, fleeting, but real. I wasn't healed. Not yet, but I had survived the fire. I was standing in the ashes of a former life. And for the first time, I could see the faint outline of something new. I touched the watch on my wrist, then the ring in my pocket. 2 weights, 2 symbols. One to remind me of time's mercy, the other to remind me of betrayal's scar. Both would guide me forward. I whispered to the ocean, as if confessing to a priest, "She doesn't get to write the ending." The waves swallowed my words, carrying them somewhere beyond the horizon. And in their place, they left me silence, not heavy this time, but cleansing. The ocean had become my confessional, and the forest my church. Days in that small coastal town blended into a rhythm. Mornings with the tide, afternoons with my journal, evenings with silence. What had begun as an escape slowly reshaped itself into something else, something stronger, cleaner. It was one morning, while jogging along a wooded trail, that I realized my chest didn't ache like it used to. My breath came heavy but steady. My legs burned, but it was a satisfying kind of pain, the kind that reminded you of growth. For the first time in months, my body felt like it belonged to me again. Back in the cabin, I showered and stood before the mirror. The man who looked back was leaner, sharper. The dark circles under my eyes had faded. My jawline, once slack from late-night drinking and despair, now carried angles again. I touched the glass, half in disbelief. I hadn't noticed the transformation happening, but now, face to face, I could see it. The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, a quiet drumbeat of progress. And in my pocket, the ring remained a weight I carried deliberately. It no longer felt like a shackle. It was a scar I chose to hold, a reminder where I'd been and what I'd survived. The shift wasn't only physical. My mind, once clouded by rage and grief, began to clear. I started reading more, books on philosophy, history, even law. I needed to understand not just a betrayal, but my options. In those late nights with only a lamp and silence for company, I studied stories of men who had been betrayed, humiliated, written off, and who came back stronger. Somewhere along the way, my journal became less about bleeding pain onto the page and more about strategy. I listed patterns, the trips, the excuses, the timelines. I mapped them out cold and methodical. She had her lover. She had her lies. But I had something she didn't expect. I had patience. I began collecting proof. It started small. I logged into our shared phone plan, checking call records. Long nighttime calls that didn't match the story she told. Then came the financial statements. Charges for gas stations near the lake, camping equipment bought twice. Receipts that didn't match her words. I wasn't obsessed. I was precise. Each detail was a stone I stacked carefully, building a foundation. I wasn't preparing for vengeance and fire and fury. I was preparing for freedom with clarity and truth. One evening, while walking along the docks, I overheard 2 fishermen talking about storms, how the strongest boats don't fight the waves but ride them. That stayed with me. I realized my anger, once a crashing tide, had softened into something more controlled. I didn't need to fight blindly. I needed to ride the storm, steer it, and let it carry me to shore. That night, I sat with the ring in my hand, turning it slowly. Its circle mocked me once, but now I saw something else. Endurance. Even fire couldn't break gold. It only purified it. And maybe, I thought, betrayal had done the same to me. Burned away my illusions, stripped me raw, and left behind something harder, stronger. When I finally returned to the city weeks later, it was not as the same man who had left. I walked into our house, and the silence greeted me, but it no longer crushed me. It was simply space that would soon be mine alone. She was away on yet another trip. Her lies had become lazy, her stories less polished. She didn't even bother pretending anymore. Not really. That, too, was information. Complacency was her weakness. I moved through the house with a colder eye now. I opened drawers, flipped through receipts, checked emails. I wasn't snooping. I was documenting. Each photo I snapped, each record I copied, was another piece of armor. The wedding photo was still in the drawer, where I'd left it. I pulled it out again, studied it under the light. I no longer felt mockery in it. Instead, I felt distance, like looking at strangers frozen in someone else's story. I set it back down gently. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was evidence. The next transformation came with action. I met with a lawyer. His office smelled of leather and dust, the kind of place where decisions cut deep. I slid the folder of evidence across his desk. He skimmed it, eyebrows rising. "You've done your homework," he said. "I've had time," I replied. My voice was calm, steady, not the shaking tones of a broken man, but the level cadence of someone who had rebuilt himself piece by piece. He laid out my options: divorce filing, financial claims, legal protections. I listened carefully, taking notes. When I left his office, I felt lighter. The path was no longer chaos. It had shape, direction. But the rebirth wasn't only legal or physical. It was spiritual. I went camping alone, deep into the woods. I built a fire, cooked simple meals, and sat beneath the stars. The crackle of the flames became a language I understood better than her false laughter. I stared at the fire, thinking of how she had used the wilderness for lies. But here, under the same stars, I reclaimed it for truth. The flames consumed the wood, but they also warmed me, lit my path, kept me alive. I took the ring from my pocket and held it over the fire. For a long moment, I considered dropping it in, watching it melt into nothing. But I didn't. Instead, I set on the ground beside me. Its weight wasn't for destruction. It was for the ending still to come. Back in town, I continued to strengthen myself. I joined a local gym, not for vanity, but for discipline. I lifted weights, ran miles, felt my muscles ache and grow. Each drop of sweat was a reminder that my body was no longer hers to neglect or diminish. It was mine, entirely mine. The transformation did not go unnoticed. Strangers treated me differently. Waiters met my eyes longer. People stepped aside when I walked by. Confidence had crept back into my posture, my tone, my very presence. I began to think less of her and more of myself, less of what I had lost, and more of what I was building. Yet in that growth, I knew the story wasn't finished. Closure was not found in silence alone. The confrontation had to come, not out of vengeance, but necessity. The final decision crystallized on a rainy evening. I sat in my cabin, the storm rattling the windows, thunder rolling through the sky. I lit a single candle and placed the ring beside it. The flame danced in its reflection, two fires facing each other. She had gone camping to betray me. That irony had gnawed at me since the first discovery. Now, I understood what needed to be done. She would go camping again, but this time, under my terms. This time, the wilderness wouldn't hide her deceit. It would expose it. I packed a small bag, some clothes, my journal, the folder of evidence, the watch on my wrist, and the ring in my pocket. As I zipped it closed, I whispered the words I had been forming for months. It's time to go camping again. And for the first time since my life had burned to ashes, I smiled. Not with joy, not with bitterness, but with quiet power. I invited her on a camping trip with the kind of softness she never expected. Just the two of us, I said, my voice even, my smile easy, like old times. Maybe it'll be good for us. She tilted her head, wary at first, then her lips curved. You mean it? I nodded. I do. Of course, she agreed. The wilderness had always been her stage for deception. Now it would be mine for truth. The day we left, the sky was a muted gray, heavy with unshed rain. She packed her bag carelessly. Too much makeup in the woods, a perfume bottle rattling in her kit. I watched in silence, amused by the irony. The same perfume that once pulled me into her orbit now felt like camouflage for lies. The drive stretched in silence, only punctuated by the hum of tires on asphalt. She scrolled her phone, occasionally glancing my way, testing me with casual remarks. So are we okay? She asked once, feigning vulnerability. I only smiled faintly. We'll talk when we get there. She seemed satisfied, believing my restraint meant forgiveness. But my silence was not surrender. It was a sharpened blade. We arrived at the lakeside campground by late afternoon. The air was damp, the scent of pine thick around us. I chose the same spot she had once shared with her lover. I knew it from the photos I'd found on her tablet. That choice wasn't an accident. I set up the tent with practiced movements, each stake driven into the earth like punctuation marks to the story I was about to tell. She flitted around the site, snapping photos for social media, laughing at nothing. She was performing, as always. When the fire was finally lit, its crackle filled the silence between us. She sat across from me, her face glowing in the flames, the same way it had that night I watched her from the shadows. Only this time, I wasn't hidden. I was present. I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it on my lap. Her eyes flicked to it, curiosity knitting her brows. What's that? She asked lightly. Evidence, I said simply. Her laugh was nervous. Evidence? What are you talking about? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pulled out the first page, a printout of her messages. I slid it across the log toward her. The firelight flickered against her face as she leaned in. Her smile faltered. Can't wait for our weekend under stars again. I read aloud, my voice calm, steady. That's what you wrote. Not to me. Never to me. She shifted, the mask slipping. That's not what it looks like. I cut her off by pulling out the next sheet. Call logs, hotel receipts, photos. One by one, I laid them between us, feeding the fire with proof. Her face drained of color. She reached for one page, but I pulled it back. No, I said firmly. You don't get to handle this. Not anymore. For the first time in years, she was speechless. The queen of excuses, the master of tears, sat stunned, the fire painted her face in shades of guilt and panic. You used these woods to betray me, I said quietly. You thought the silence of the trees would keep your secrets. But silence has a way of echoing. Her lips trembled. I can explain. You won't, I said, sharper now, because I don't want your stories anymore. I've heard enough lies to last me a lifetime. The flames popped, throwing sparks into the night sky. I pulled the ring from my pocket, held it up so the firelight danced on its gold surface. Her eyes widened, recognizing it instantly. This, I said, was supposed to mean forever. Instead, it became the heaviest chain I ever carried. I dropped it onto the stack of papers between us. The ring clinked against the evidence, a perfect symbol of the marriage it once represented. Promises burned to ash. Tears welled in her eyes. But they didn't move me. I had seen them before. Every time she wanted to reset the board, to erase her sins with salt water and apologies. You can cry, I said, my voice low, steady. But the difference now is that I don't care. Your tears aren't mine to clean up anymore. She tried a new angle then, reaching for my hand. Please, we can fix this. We can start over. I pulled my hand away. No, I already started over. Without you. The weight of those words seemed to crush her. She folded into herself, her shoulders trembling. For once, she wasn't performing for anyone. For once, the silence was real. I reached into my bag again and pulled out the final piece, a set of divorce papers. I had kept them neatly folded, waiting for this moment. I placed them on the log between us. This, I said, tapping the papers, is the only truth left between us. Sign it. Don't sign it. Either way, this marriage ends tonight. Her mouth opened, closed, open again, like a fish gasping on dry land. She whispered, "You're serious." I met her eyes across the flames. More serious than I've ever been in my life. The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of sap in the fire. Finally, she nodded, small and broken. She knew. The performance was over. I stood then, brushing dirt from my hands. I didn't need to watch her anymore. I didn't need to hear her excuses or see her tears. I had carried her shadow long enough. I picked up the ring one last time, weighing it in my palm. It felt lighter now, as if the fire had burned away its power. I slipped it into my pocket, not as a chain, but as a relic, a scar made solid. "Goodbye," I said softly. Not dramatic, not cruel, just final. And with that, I turned and walked away from the fire. The drive home was quiet, but not heavy. The night air through the open window felt like freedom, the hum of the road beneath me like a hymn. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing back to anyone, wasn't trapped in anyone else's lies. I was simply moving forward. At a rest stop, I pulled over and stepped out. The sky above was clear now, stars scattered across it like promises unbroken. I took the ring from my pocket, held it up against the constellations. Once, it had meant eternity with her. Now it meant survival, transformation, reclamation. I slipped it back into my pocket. But this time it didn't burn. It simply rested there, like any other object. No longer sacred, no longer binding. By the time I reached the city, dawn was breaking. The first light stretched across the horizon, painting everything gold. I pulled over again, just to watch. The sun rose slow but certain, burning away the night. I saw the fire at the campsite, how it consumed everything in its reach. But unlike that fire, this light didn't destroy. It illuminated. It revealed. And I realized then that I wasn't just free of her. I was free of the man I used to be, the one who mistook control for love, the one who clung to illusions, the one who let himself be erased. He had burned away with the lies. What remained was me. I whispered into the morning air, the words final, sacred, mine alone. She doesn't get to write the ending. I do. And with that, I drove into the new day, the ashes of former life fading behind me, the horizon wide open before me.